Wow! We're already halfway through the class. Did you realize that? Damn, time flies when you're having fun, and you are already doing an amazing job so far. Just think about it. You know how to create an awesome outdoor scene, and now an indoor scene like the saloon. How awesome is that? But unfortunately, this saloon right here looks kind of ugly. And that's because it's missing light. And that's what this lesson is all about. Now, before we're going to place any lights in the scene, we're going to have to make sure that the sunlight from outside is not casting its light through my studio to indoor. And I've talked about that before. We're going to have to transform the geometry into a mesh in order to do that. So I have them right here into my outliner. You can see the lower window, the upper window, which are the cutouts for these two. And now we've got the main box or the studio itself. So we're just going to select all of these geometries right here, then head into the details panel, and right here you should see the option to create a static mesh. So just click on that, and we're going to give that a name because we're actually going to create a 3D model from this. Let's call that Studio, and hit Create Static Mesh. There we go. And you can see that the lights now are going out. And that's because a mesh does not let light through, but a geometry does. There we go. We learned something new. Now you might think, Jordy, it was so easy to work in this environment while we still had light. You took it all away. Well, no worries. We can always go up here to the menu, and instead of unlit, we're going to set it to unlit. And now our environment looks even more ugly. But don't worry, it's just a temporary solution so that we can work further. So let's start by creating our very first indoor light. And I'm going to create one here underneath my bar. This right here should be a nice spot to have a light right there. So in my content browser, I actually already went ahead and downloaded something off from the Quixel Megascans library. Let me just look for static meshes, and I should have, let me just search for it, a light somewhere right here. There we go. So let's just drag that into the scene. There it is. Now this here is just a static mesh. It does not emit any light. It's just a model, that's it. If we look inside, you can also see that there's not really a light bulb in there. That's because we have to create that ourselves. But let's start by adding an actual light in this fixture. You can go here to the menu on top, say Add to the project, and we're gonna go over to Lights. Here we have a whole bunch of lights that we can work with, but most of the time we're only going to work with these three, which is the point light, the spotlight, and the rectangle light. Let's use the spotlight for this fixture right here. And let's drag it into the scene on top here of the light. Where is it? Where's my widget? That's kind of like going everywhere. There it is. So let's bring that in place. There we go, as if it seems like it's coming out of this fixture like that. And you can kind of see the cone. That is where the light is going to fall, and it's going to cast its light right here in this environment. Now we can't really see anything right now, and that is because we are in the unlit view mode. So let's change this back now to lit, since we actually do have a light right now. And there we go. We can see a light being casted here on the floor and everything, and on my bar, and it sits here in this fixture. Now it's still pretty dark. I can't really see much, so let's add a post-processing volume in here so that we can set a manual exposure. Like maybe we should have done that earlier. So let's quickly go here to Add, Visual Effects, and then Post-Process Volume, drag that into the scene. And the first thing that we want to do with this post-processing volume is make sure that it covers the entire scene. So under the Unbound option or the Infinite Extent, make sure to enable that. We have seen this previously in this class in our outdoor scene. And now we can go ahead and look for exposure somewhere. Right here, we're going to set the metering mode to manual, and the exposure compensation, we're going to change that until we kind of like see something here. Maybe set that to 20. There we go. Okay, we can actually see something now. That is good. So this here is a start. We have our light. This here is the arrow where it points to, and we have to make sure that it really sticks here nicely in that light so that it seems like it's coming out. And this is looking good. We have a light that is casting lights. So if you look from a distance, let me just turn my sun around because it's interfering with my light. You know what? Let's make it night. There we go. So this is working. If I'm going to deselect the light, we can actually see that light beam coming out, which is, by the way, created with the Exponential Height Fog, which we have in our custom atmosphere blueprint. If we go over to the Exponential Height Fog right here and play around with the density, So right here, the fog density, we can introduce more or less of that cone. If there's no fog, if we set that to 0, we of course don't have that cone and only the surfaces are being lit up. But you know, that cone is nice, definitely in a saloon like this. So let's just increase that. There we go. Press G on your keyboard to hide all these billboards or widgets. And you know, from a distance, this looks okay. This is good. But if we go up close and we're actually going to look into the light, hey, we do see light coming out of this light fixture, but we don't actually see a light bulb. So that doesn't make any sense. Well, that light bulb is something that we have to create ourselves. Now, in order to do that, we're going to have to go back here to the Add menu and we're going to look for shapes and simply add a sphere in here. So let's drag that into the scene, and that sphere is going to be way too big. So let's decrease the size of that. There we go. And that is going to function as the light bulb. So let's also place it nicely here inside of the lamp. It always takes some going back and forward. And by the way, if it's too hard to see, always disable lit and go back to unlit. It's kind of like makes things easier. All right, this looks good. This could be a light bulb. Now let's go back to the lit mode. There we go. And it's not really actually casting light. It's just a sphere sitting there mostly catching light instead of emitting light. So that also doesn't look really good. Well, that has to do with the material. So right now, if we select that sphere and go here into the details panel, you can see here that by default, a basic shape material has been applied, which is just a white color. That's it. But we're going to have to give it a different material, a material that emits light. Now, unfortunately, there's no one-click solution for that. We are actually going to have to create our own material. Now, don't be too scared. It's actually not that hard. I'm going to disable here my filters and go back to my root folder, the content folder. By the way, here's our studio mesh for if you haven't seen that yet. Anyways, I'm going to right click in here, or again, you can also go to the add menu. That's the same menu. And from there, I'm going to choose to create a new material. And I'm going to name that my light material. There we go. We can already go ahead and apply that to the sphere by simply dragging it here into the materials option. There we go. It's now been applied, but it still doesn't emit light. That is because we have to change some things about this material. We can either double click right here to open it up, or we can double click on the material itself in the content browser. There we go. Now, don't get scared because yes, this here is a node, the kind of thing that I was talking about. If you have to create a blueprint or a material, you're going to have to work with nodes, which is kind of like the coding system behind Unreal Engine. But the node structure that we're going to create right now is so easy that you don't need to fear. And also, it's a good introduction to nodes, actually, just to get an understanding of how this could work. So we have to input something here into all of these properties of the material. And you can see here that we have one option called emissive color. That is going to make sure that the material can give light. So we need to input something into the emissive color, and that is going to be a color. So let's right click, and that is going to reveal all of the different functions and elements that we can use to combine them together to create a node structure to give functionality. But in this case, we just need a color. And that color node is actually called a constant. A constant actually means a value. If we take the normal constant function right here, we can input one value, such as 10 or 20 or whatever. But we can also go for something like a tree vector constant, which is the thing that we are going to choose. This allows us to input tree values like RGB, red, green, blue, and together creates a color. So with that node, we can simply double click on it to choose any color. And we're just going to make it white. There we go. Hit OK. And now all we have to do is drag here the node into the emissive color. And that's it. If you move this window a little bit down and save that material, you will instantly see the result. Bada bim, bada boom. Our light bulb is giving light. Now you might think, Jordy, it's not giving enough light. I want more light out of my material. Well, here's the thing. Materials are not used to actually create light. I mean, it emits light, and if we move it closer here to the lamp itself, you can see that it actually emits light, but that is not how we should actually use it. If you want something to actually give light, you use a light such as the spotlight that we've previously created. All right, let's close here this material window and let's organize things a little bit better here in the outliner. So this right here is the actual lamp. If we enable and disable that, you can see it disappear. And in there, we actually want to attach the sphere, which is the thing that gives light. Let's drag that into the lamp. There we go. And also the spotlight. This way, if we now just select the lamp and move that around, you will see that everything moves with it. These three elements should always be attached to each other. It not only gives you a better organization, but again, also better to move things around. So we can now go ahead and actually make duplications of this light. Unfortunately, it will not make a duplication of the entire group. You actually have to select here all of these three layers and then Alt-drag to make a duplicate of all of them. So now we have two lights. And that's simply what I'm going to do in my entire scene. Just add a whole bunch of lights to give light to the scene. Now I want to show you guys one more thing, and for that I'm going to go back to my unlit view mode and maybe perhaps go here in the back. Let's add some sort of a fluorescent light. If I go back to my mega scans and then turn on my static mesh filter and look for lamp, I should have something in here. There we go, a fluorescent ceiling light. Now, of course, we don't want to use a directional light in this case because this thing is long. We need a rectangular light, and we've got that as well. Go to the Add menu on top, go over to Lights, and from there you'll find the rectangular light. Drag that into the scene. There it is. Now, the rectangular light, we can rotate this by the way, is going to emit light here from this inner rectangle. And the outer rectangles are going to be its flags, just like a film light. So we can go ahead, go into the settings of this light, and we can actually change the barn door angle here, as you can see. There we go, making it more focused. We can also change the height and the width. And what you want to do is make it kind of like match with the light fixture. So as we're putting this light here into this fixture, you want to make sure that its size is also matching with that fixture. So don't make it too big or too small, but make sure that it fits, that it makes sense, that maybe there are two fluorescent tubes in there emitting the lights. There we go. This is looking good, I guess. And my barn doors are not the exact same size as you can see here, so maybe I want to close those as well. There we go. It's always a matter of going back and forward and seeing how it looks. All right, let's turn on the lit view mode again and see what it gives. There we go. Plenty of light we got right here. Maybe I want to decrease my exposure a little bit from the post-processing volume. Let me just look for exposure right here. Set that to like 15 or something. Okay, it looks better. All right, let's select that light again. Let's scroll down. We have some more options here like the indirect lighting intensity and also the volumetric scattering intensity. These two options mean how much it's going to interact with the fog. So that means that also you can set that individually per each light. You don't have to increase the global fog to get more of these cones, but you can also set that for every individual light by increasing here the volumetric scattering and perhaps the intensity of that scattering. All right, let me just reset these two. Then of course we got the normal intensity, like how bright should the light be. We can change the color, maybe to something more orangey, or to even be more precise, instead of the light's color, you should also have like a temperature setting somewhere. Let me just look for temperature. There we go. So instead of a light color, we can also choose a light temperature, which resembles more like the real world. Should it be warm or should it be like very white? More bluish. I mean, most of these settings really speak for themselves. And I would just say go through them and see what else that you can change to make them fit more into your scene. All right, one last thing that we have to do, and that is again, make sure that there is a fluorescent tube in that light. This time, not create or don't create a sphere, but a cylinder. So drag that into the scene. That is a way too big cylinder. So let's decrease the size of that. There we go. Stretch it out. Rotate it around and put it into the light fixture. Again, set it to unlit. Sometimes that's just easier to see what you're doing. And I want to scale that a little bit more like that. Position. I see that we can actually insert 3 tubes in here. That's interesting. All right, 1, 2, and 3. They don't give light just yet. Let's go back to lit mode. So let's locate our material again. I'm going to deselect my filter, go back to my content root folder. Oh yeah, remove my search of lamp. Right here is my light material, and I can actually go ahead and select all 3 of these tubes and then apply the light material to the material option right here in my details panel. There we go, and bada bim, bada boom, we get fluorescent tubes. And important, make sure to attach these here to that ceiling light. This one right here too. There we go. Let me just collapse some of these. There we go. So this here is now my entire light. All of these other actors are attached to my light fixture, and this looks way more natural. If we look into the light, there are actual fluorescent tubes in there. Really cool. And I think this looks great. If we now go out of this corridor and look through it from the saloon, we kind of have this hallway where we have some light going on. But I might want to make that a little bit more dirtier, maybe give it more of a green tint or something. I can just change that with the light color, of course. All right, and that is how you can light out an interior. What I'm going to do next is just kind of place a bunch more lights in my scene. And in the next lesson, we're going to fine-tune the look of my interior a bit more by working more with the post-processing volume as well as the fog to really make my scene stand out and make it look cinematic. Oh, hi! I was just calibrating the engine. You know, I was telling it that this here is the mesh, that this right here is the shape that we created with the emission material onto it, and here's the actual light. All right, we get the point. I went ahead and just put my entire interior scene full with lights, as you can see. I've done nothing else than just doing that. Let me just set that real quick to unlit so that you can better see what's going on in here. So here are all of my fixtures. Now actually, you don't always need to work with fixtures, of course. Definitely in places like these here, you can just have your light stand there, because if you're making shots like this, you don't really see the fixtures. So keep that in mind as well. Always think about optimization. The less objects that you need, the less lights that you actually need to use, the better. Let me just turn that light. Okay, let me just set that back to lit because we are running into a couple of problems. Even though that it's starting to look better, it's still not looking great. And that's because it's missing fine detail. So locate the custom atmosphere blueprint that we created in the beginning of this class, and we're going to go over to the exponential height fog right here. There are a couple of settings in here that we can change to give a drastic different look to our interior scene. We know what most of these settings already do, like the fog density just simply adds more fog. Let me just set that to something like 10 to really give you an idea what that does. But this doesn't really make it better, so let's have a look at some other options. I'm going to scroll down, and I should somewhere find this option right here. The emissive and the extinction scale. Let's start off with the extinction scale. So this option right here is going to make sure that the lights are going to interact more with the fog in the atmosphere. So by increasing that, you instantly see here that we are just getting much more illumination across the entire room just by increasing that value. And you can also see here that the lights are getting these strokes as they interact more with those fog particles. And this already looks a whole lot better. Now let me just remove all of the widgets or the billboards by hitting the G on my keyboard to get a better view. Let me just reset that value again and set it back to something like 10. Just see the before and after, how much better that is. And definitely for a scene like this old saloon, this fog really helps. All right, maybe this is a little bit too much. Let's set that to, I don't know, like something like 6 or 7. There we go, much better. Keep it subtle. And then the next option is the emissive color. Click on that to change the color of the fog. Now, I would never really go and really change the color like this because that would really make it, let's say, artistic. What I would do is really keep this simple. So I'm just going to keep my color at white, maybe like a tiny bit of orange in there, but not too much, and really bring down here the brightness to all the way on the bottom, and then maybe like a tiny bit up. Not too much. This is just going to brighten up your scene a little bit more. Definitely if you think that it's way too dark, this is a great way to just make the exposure in general and those shadow parts just a bit more clear. All right, let's hit OK. And again, let's have a look at the before and the after. I'm going to reset that value. This is the before. Control Z to undo my action. This is the after. So that's up to you at how bright you want to make your scene. But these two settings from within the exponential height fog are super important for interiors. If we take a look at the shadows, like here with the chair and a table, these shadows are pretty hard. The same thing with the stairs over here as well, and at my bar too. Basically, any shadow is very hard. So we want to soften those shadows. How do we do that? Well, for starters, let's select all of the lights in the scene. I'm going to go here into my outliner and simply search for lights, which is going to bring up my folder lights, and of course in there show all of the lights. And to be even more specific, I'm going to search for spotlights. So I can very easily like select all of my spotlights individually. There we go. Make sure that I have all of them selected. I can now make changes to all of these lights at the same time because these are the same actors. They are all spotlights, so they have all the same properties. We're going to look here in the details panel for source radius, and it should be right here. This is going to make sure to get more softer shadows. And let me just zoom in a bit more. For example, here on my staircase. And if you don't want to see all of the cones here in your scene, if that is bothering you, just press G on your keyboard. We still have all of our lights selected. We just don't see the wireframes, the billboards and everything. So it might be better to work with. All right, let me just increase the source radius to something like around 30 and see what that does. There we go. We can now see that we get way more natural, softer shadows. And this is occurring everywhere since we got all the lights selected. Like the table is also looking a whole lot better, and as well here at the bar. You don't want your shadows to be too soft, because after all, we're still working with spotlights and not indirect lighting. But this is starting to look a whole lot better. And when we think about soft shadows, let's have a look at the sunlight coming through the window. These shadows still look pretty hard. Now this is a sunlight that doesn't have a source radius, so there's a different option in there to also get soft shadows. Let me just undo my search here on top, and I'm going to go back to my custom atmosphere and select my sunlight, which is the directional light. So instead of source radius, we're now going to look for the source angle. It's a minor detail, but it is a difference. All right, let me just increase that to, I don't know, like 30 perhaps again. There we go. This is maybe too soft. Let me just set that to 10. All right, this is starting to look better. You can see now how much of a difference this is doing to my scene. Definitely with all of this fog and everything, with the low sunlight, we shouldn't have these hard shadows. This is making much more sense. And we can even choose the angle of the soft lighting. And this is really going to have an impact here on reflections like the chair and everything. Here's that option. Underneath the source angle, we can find source soft angle. So let me just increase that to something like 100 or something. You can see here what that does here to the reflection of the chair. It's much less hard, it's much softer now. So these two settings are definitely something to play around with in your sunlight. The source angle and the source soft angle. All right, and that is almost it actually. You can see how much better this scene is looking right now with just these minor settings. Now the last thing in terms of look that I want to talk about, and that is more in terms of the color of the light. What I always like to do is to work with color contrasts or a difference in color. As you can see here, we have 3 different colors going on in my scene, even though we have this overall warm tone. Now, this does not per se have to do something with Unreal Engine, but just with cinematography in general. Now, what I've done basically is creating 3 different layers of lighting. We have the warm lights here on top, which you can see here. These illuminate the room in this interior. And then we've got this balcony here on top, and I've worked with a little bit more colder lights. I actually used the color temperature. Let me just have a look at what exactly that I worked with. If I select this one here, look for temperature. You can see that I set these at 3800, while these here in the normal room are set to 2800, which is a lot warmer. And that way we're getting some sort of a contrast with the foreground and the backgrounds. And to break that even more, you can also work with practical lights. Practical lights are lights that are visible in your scene, such as this standing light right here. And what I did with that light was actually set the color temperature even warmer, set that to 2300. And that way we're creating even more contrast between the global lights, the balcony lights, and then this practical light right here. And to tip it off, we have this separate room here in the back, which actually doesn't have to do anything with the normal interior, the saloon itself. Like this here is a corridor in the back. This could be like a filthy storage room or something. So we have this ugly fluorescent light set up there, which we created in the previous lesson. I made that green, that filthy fluorescent lighting color, and that is giving me this color contrast over my entire scene, which is really great. If all the colors of the lighting would be the same, then the scene would be pretty flat. Now, do make sure not to mix too much colors with each other. You don't want to mix pink and blue and orange and red and whatever together. And that is just going to make it a clown show. Choose a particular look, like in my case, that warm look, and try to work with that. Work with colder and warmer lights to retain that same look and feel. All right, so that is it for lighting. That should give you a great looking scene. Now, let's talk about problems. There are 2 problems in this scene which need to be fixed. The first one here is you can see some of these lights have actually these red crosses through them. Well, we need to fix that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But first, let's have a look at a second problem that we have, and that is this wall. You can kind of see the green lighting coming through. And that is because this wall right here is a geometry and not a mesh. The same problem that we had with the studio in general, where the sunlight was casting its light through the walls of the studio because it was a geometry and not a mesh. So also for this back wall here, I'm going to select that. It's right here, upper wall back. Let me just delete my search in the details panel and locate the create static mesh option right here. Click on that, and this name is good. Hit create static mesh. And you will now see that the light here is kind of like fading away. It's not coming through anymore, and that is good. You don't per se have to transform every geometry into a static mesh, but if you are running into problems like these, then you do have to. So go around in your scene and see if there are any light leaks somewhere and fix that by creating static meshes. All right, so the second problem are these red crosses. Now, in order to start with explaining what's exactly going on in here, I have to explain Lumen a little bit. Essentially, Lumen is the new thing within Unreal Engine 5. This is making sure that we get real-time reflections, which was not possible before. Let me just showcase that better to you guys. I'm going to create a new shape right here. Just a cube is fine. Place that into my scene. There it is. Let me just bring that to the front. There we go. And I'm going to kind of like shape this as a bounce board, which we could use in the real world or something. I'm going to rotate that a little bit. There we go. So if we now bounce light into this shape right here, it will also be reflected onto my meta-human. And let's do that. I'm going to take like a spotlight, bring that into my scene. There we go. I'm going to rotate that so that it points against this bounce board. I'm going to make that cone a little bit smaller to get this hard lighting. There we go. It's being casted onto that bounce board. So as you can see, the light is not interfering with the meta-human itself. It is casting its light only on the bounce boards. Now let's increase the intensity of that light. Where is that control? Right here. Let me just set that to something like 50. There we go. And you can see here what that does to my meta-human. We just set that even higher to 100 or something. There we go. You can start to see how my meta-human is starting to light up more and more. And that is coming off from the reflection of this bounce board, which is really cool. So yes, in essence, that does mean that we can actually use Unreal Engine just like you would light out a scene in the real world. You can use bounce boards. Sounds really cool and all, but Lumen also has its own problems. Let me just set that even higher here. I don't know, something like 500 to really make it pop. You can already start to see my meta-human kind of like flicker around a little bit. Well, this right here, what you're seeing, what it's occurring is Lumen. Lumen is very nice on paper, but in reality, it still comes with many bugs and with many artifacts. Definitely things like hair still has a lot of trouble to catching up these reflections to make all those calculations. Okay, so now that we understand that, let me just delete this spotlight right here and the bounce board. Now that we understand that, what's going on with Lumen, we know what's going on in the entire scene right here, because every single light right here is doing that. In real time, it's changing the reflections. So if I take one of these lights and move it around to a different position, it's going to calculate in real time what needs to happen with those reflections. That is the power of Lumen. But at the same time, it also has its limitations. At a certain point, Unreal will say like, hey, these are way too many reflections happening right now, and I have trouble to calculate this precisely. And also, you're going to notice that performance in Unreal is going to drop tremendously. And so there's this rule inside Unreal Engine that says, hey, you cannot mix more than 3 lights together. Now, you might think like, I'm not mixing any lights. I mean, they're all separately standing here. Well, let's select all of the lights. Let's see how much they're actually interfering with each other. We can actually here in the lights folder, I can actually right click on it, go over to select and just say all descendants. There we go. So it will make a selection of all the meshes inside of that folder. Now let's have a look at all the cones. Well, as you can see, these lights are interfering with each other. The cones here are overlapping, and that is giving us that problem. When there are more than 3 lights overlapping with each other, Unreal will say like, hey, there's a problem with this light, and it will just add this red cross through the light saying there's a problem with this one. Now, does that mean that you have to fix this? Well, no, you can ignore that error if you want to, without having to worry. It's just that the reflection calculations will not be as precise. But is that something that the human eye can see? I mean, if I press G on my keyboard, do you see that my lighting reflections are not precise? I mean, I for sure can't see it. So in my case, I could ignore that issue. But the second problem is performance. I mean, my computer still runs it pretty good, but once we're going to start adding more and more and more lights in here, performance will start to drop tremendously. Now, there are 2 ways to fix this problem. One is by changing the radius or the cones of these lights, because we don't want them to interfere with each other. For instance, if I select any of these lights here, you can see that they have these cones, like where the lighting is going to be casted to. And you want to make sure that one of these cones is not interfering with a second light. This one, you can see that these 2 here are overlapping. So we could go ahead and change the inner cone angle or the outer cone angle, set that to 30 or something. And this way they are not interfering with each other. Well, actually they still are. If you are going to take a look below the floor, they still will. Even if your floor is blocking light, Unreal is going to take a look at the cone itself, and if that cone is going through your floor, well, then they are still interacting in some sort of a way. So also we want to decrease the length of that cone, which we can do from the option called attenuation radius. Maybe set that to 500 or something. There we go. So now they are not coming through, or at least they're not interfering with each other anymore. So that is one way of fixing it. I mean, the problem is not really fixed because we have so many other lights in this scene. They're just all colliding with each other. So I have to change the cone of every single light so that they don't interfere with each other. But then again, do we really want that? Because that is also going to change the look of our lighting. This is not an ideal solution. You can see here that I'm losing the light on my floor. So I'm just going to hit Ctrl Z to undo my actions. I don't want to do that. I have my light, I like it, I just want to fix these red crosses. Well, we could also kind of disable Lumen in a way. Not really disable it, but just say to Lumen, hey, do your job, but just don't do it in real time. Because after all, that's the problem, the real time issue. So what I'm going to do is select all of my lights. So I'm going to perhaps search again for light. That's always easy. And look for all the lights in here. To select them. There we go. We have now selected all of them and we can make changes to them all at once. You can find here an option in the details panel called mobility. And we have 3 options: static, stationary, and movable. It's currently set to stationary. That means that the lights or these actors, by the way, we have this option with meshes as well, with almost everything, that these meshes or actors are fixed. They are stationary. They are set to one position and they will stay there. But they have the ability to change in properties, like the intensity can change during the scene, or perhaps the color of the light, anything like that that still affects Lumen in a way that it needs to make changes in real time. Now the third option here, movable, is the same as stationary. The light can be brighter or dimmer during a scene or change color, but also move in position. So that means that this light can perhaps like swing around or suddenly stand on a different spot. Again, Lumen has to calculate these reflections in real time in order for that light to do all of that. So then there is the last option, or actually the first option, and that is static. I'm gonna click on it and instantly you can see all of these red crosses disappear. What we're saying now is, hey, this light is static. It's on a fixed position, but also its intensity, its color, none of the properties will change during my scene. And so that means that Lumen does not have to make any real-time calculations anymore. Now you will see an error here on the top right, top left, saying that the lighting needs to be rebuilt. Basically what Unreal is asking now is, hey, can I make my calculations for these static lights to get really good reflections and everything and just keep that in my memory without having to change it afterwards in real time? Well, okay, let's do that. Head over to the build menu on top, and from there select either build all levels, which is going to build everything, like the materials and everything and all, but that is going to take long. We only need to build the lighting actually, because that is what Unreal is asking us to do. So let's click on that. which is going to build the lighting. This can take a little time, so let's just wait for that. In the meantime, let me answer a question that probably pops into your mind right now, and that is, why should we then ever use stationary or the movable option? Well, we've seen previously that we can go into the simulation mode. If you want something like a flickering light in the background, which can be created using blueprints, or you want a light to actually move around in that simulation mode, then you need to set it to either stationary or to movable. Sometimes you want that, like perhaps that corridor lighting, that green fluorescent light that I have in the back. Maybe I want to flicker that because it's a broken light. Of course, I'm not going to set all of my lights to stationary then, but only that specific light. So that means that Lumen only needs to calculate its reflections for one light and not all of them. And we know that we can interfere 3 lights maximum with each other. And there we go, the lighting has been built, everything is looking fine. But again, guys, don't worry too much about that red cross. I just explained it because the first time that I saw it, I was also getting crazy trying to look for an answer. But actually, you don't have to worry about it. As long as you don't see any flickering or any weird artifacts or anything like that, you don't actually need to set them to static and build the lights. All right, guys, thank you for watching. Hello? Oh, hey boss. The meltdown. No. That was Josh. I had nothing to do with the meltdown. That was Josh. Yeah, from Unreal Engine 4. you know Josh. Yeah, okay. Bye. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next lesson.